Howdy folks and welcome to Mindfork. Sorry for the absence, real life has been kicking my ass a bit. Aside from October-ish, I think this is the longest I've gone without making a video since the last one was at the end of January, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not your dad, I've brought the milk and so we're ready to get back into it. Peak by Agrofall, a collaborative effort between AgroCrab and Landfall, came out just over 7 weeks ago on June 17th. For those unaware, which would be odd since why would you click on a video about a game you've never heard of, Peak is a co-op climbing game where you get stuck on an island, Lost style, and once you're there, your goal is to ascend through 4 biomes to reach the summit of the island and helicopter yourself out of there. And it's done a great job at bringing in a loyal player base with its fun gameplay and quirky mechanics. Speaking of quirky mechanics, that subscribe button is looking pretty dusty these days. Might be a good idea to have a look and see if it needs some good old TLC. Hit that notification bell too, since my upload schedule is about as consistent as gas prices. So it'd probably be helpful to know when I upload rather than waiting for me to upload. But anywho, you know why we're here and what the plan is? What do you mean I've been rambling this entire time? So basically, we're gonna split this video into answering 2 questions. 1. Could Peak's Island exist in real life? And if it could, 2. Where in the world would that be? I thought the second question might have already been answered for us by using the loading screen, but those are some fake ass continents if I've ever seen them, so we're going to have to start from scratch. I do also want to note, before we jump properly into it, that I've avoided any interviews, articles, or AMAs that could potentially discuss this. I wanted to go based solely on what we see in the game, so if the creators have literally said where exactly this island is, then shit. But hey, it's still a fun hypothetical, so we're still gonna do it. Anyway, let's start with the first question. Could this island exist? All we really need to do here is look at what we see in the game and figure out if these things would happen on a real volcanic island. And for digestibility, we'll tackle each level one at a time. The shore, the tropics, the Alpine, and the Caldera. Oh, and also the kiln, but I'd argue that's more of an extension of the Caldera, so I won't count it. So where should we throw the dart first? Well, I think we should work from the bottom upwards, right? Like all good things. Anyway, when you think of an island, you don't normally assume that the biomes along it, or up it in this case, would vary so greatly, right? At least I didn't when I started to do the research for this video, but then I stumbled across something called altitudinal zonation. The idea is that the higher a mountain goes, the colder and drier it gets, and in most cases you can split the degree of temperature and humidity change into 4 zones: lowlands, the montane, the alpine, and the nivel. Funnily enough, Peaks Mountain is also split into 4 zones, so we should be able to compare them to each other as they come. And so the first is the lowlands, which, as you might have guessed, is the lowest level of the mountain. Around the world, it can vary pretty wildly, from lush tropical rainforests to barren dry deserts, and so the things we see on the Peak Island's shore should line up with what we can expect to see in real life lowlands. First is the jellyfish and massive sea urchins that are oh my gosh. First are the jellyfish and sea urchins that are littered across the island. Marine life, like these two, love taking refuge in the water around volcanic islands because it's packed full of minerals. When volcanic rocks interact with seawater, they slowly release things like iron, magnesium, calcium, and potassium that marine life love, so it's not unexpected to see them here. Second is the culminar jointing. These things. You might have seen actual rock formations like this before in places like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, or the Garni Gorge in Armenia. These hexagonal structures are created when magma or lava cools into rock, which, when it cools, breaks into these shapes over time. There's way more to it than that, and if you're curious, I'd highly suggest looking it up, since it's actually pretty cool, but that's the gist of it. Since this is a volcano, you may also find these here as well, so check 2. And finally, there are a couple other things we can briefly go over that show that this volcanic island is legit, like the lack of vegetation and the black sand, which appears as a random variator in some playthroughs. For vegetation, volcanic islands don't often have a lot of grass since it's pretty harsh environment wise. However, pioneer species like coconut palms will grow around the shore of a volcanic island, mainly because they're hardy. And finally, the black sand. It's made from tiny fragments of basalt, which occurs when lava comes into contact with water. So, check, everything we see on the shore is something you would reasonably see on a real life volcanic island's beaches. So, point 1 for peak. Next are the tropics. If we cross them off in order, then the tropics should represent the montane zone, the second lowest level of altitudinal zonation. Now, like lowlands, montane zones can also vary, but it's a little more narrow, and in fact, it's because of this lower diversity of plants and wildlife that we can actually take the first step in answering our second question: where in the world is this island? The insane levels of rain that we see here generally occur in... drum roll please, I'll do some sound effects. The tropics. Really should have been pretty obvious given the name. The constant rain pouring down in this level suggests that it's within range of the ITCZ, or the Intertropical Convergence Zone, which, to grossly oversimplify, is an area near the equator that generates these fuck-off massive thunderstorms and therefore lots and lots of rain. The most rain you'd find anywhere in the world, probably. And luckily for us, the ITCZ only occurs within the tropics. So now we know that if the island exists, it's somewhere near the equator, which, luckily for us again, actually guides us back to our first question, since if the island is near the equator, then the tropics level we see in peak could exist as a cloud forest, a very wet, tropical, montane-based forest. Pretty great descriptor, right? A real one has an abundance of moss and vegetation and is among the most biodiversity-rich ecosystems in the world. I don't know about you, but I'd say that pretty accurately describes the tropics level, wouldn't you say? Speaking of biodiversity-rich ecosystems, what a fuck. Let's talk about the trees. The two types we see in Peak's tropics level are banana trees, or whatever they're called in-game, and some secondary tree that I just have not been able to identify. Even after ages of trying to figure out what type these goddamn trees are, I just could not do it. I'm not a tree guy, and there are surprisingly few places to narrow down the search without calling it the long, Lorax-looking umbrella tree. So, if we have any dendrologists in the comments, then let me know what you think. I'm just kind of shit out of luck on this one. I can tell you though that the attributes of this tree, its dense canopy, the tall and thin trunk, and its coexistence with the quasi-banana tree, does all align with growing in a tropical, montane, moist forest. Next is the Alpine, which is both going to confuse me greatly and simplify things even more, considering that the Alpine is both the name for the in-game level and also the name of the level of altitudinal zonation above the montane zone. For our purposes here, you'd be better off thinking of it as a transitional zone between the montane zone and the nival zone, the tippy top of the mountain. But as for the Alpines themselves, snow and wind are extremely common, so we can check that off. And now that we're talking about it, I'll bet you have that one question burning a hole in your pocket. The capybaras. What's the deal? Well, ordinarily, capybaras don't find themselves in snowy landscapes. They're semi-aquatic mammals, so their habitats are usually amidst dense vegetation, rivers, lakes, ponds, swamps, etc. In summary, they love warm, wet, lowland areas. So, if we were to find them in the game, we'd probably be more likely to see them closer to the tropics level than the Alpine one. However, we won't discount it entirely because they're not alone up there, are they? They're always relaxing comfortably in hot springs. So warm in fact that even you as the player can dip in while a blizzard is going to keep your temperature up. It's always a great find game-wise. So what does that mean? Well, these hot springs probably create a warm microclimate. Paired with the fact that we're in the tropics, a naturally warmer area of the world, it's not totally far-fetched to see capybaras here, so long as there's plenty of grass, no predators, and water to wallow in, then yeah, they could theoretically survive at higher elevations near these hot pools. there is a basis for this in real life, that being in Japan, where they have hot springs in their capybara exhibits, of which they enjoy immensely. So while not entirely natural for them, they do clearly like soaking in warm waters. Aside from that, there is a proper reason why I started talking so much about the goddamn capybaras, and that's because they're native to South America, narrowing down our second question's answer even further. Next is the Caldera. In real life, these are massive sinkholes in the tops of mountains that occur when a volcano erupts. Lava and magma spew out and leave empty space for all the stone and dirt to fall in again, making this crater in the ground. I shouldn't need to tell you that lava doesn't ordinarily rise and fall so fast like we see in the game, but I'd consider that a physics issue and not necessarily a geological one, so we're still safe. Honestly, there's not a lot to say here because very little exists here, real life or in-game. But the one thing I can kind of comment on is that there are different types of calderas. There are ones with lakes in them, like Fernandina Island, or there are ones that are even still active, like the famous one in Yellowstone. The one in Peak, yeah, it's definitely one of these two. I'll let you guess which one that is. So that's that, right? We just went through every single biome in the game, and there wasn't a single ecologically impossible thing in there. So, based on all that, could this island, exactly as we see it in-game, exist in real life? Unfortunately, we're not done. There is still a little more to add. I gotcha though, didn't I? I brushed over it, but there is one extremely important detail about Peak's Alpine level specifically that doesn't exist in real life, and that's the snow. When you die or complete the game, you're shown, for a brief moment, the height that you climbed throughout the game, and whenever you succeed at bringing in the helicopter, the height caps off at about 1,920 meters. So that's Peak's mountain, it's 1,920 meters tall. Great. What has that got to do with the snow? Well, for a tropical island to have snow, it would need to be very, very tall, and unfortunately for us, much taller than Peak's mountain. Most other tropical mountains are more than double that size and have less snow than we see in Peak's Alpine level. As you may have guessed, there is an easy fix here. The tropics are hotter because they're closer to the equator, so just take it out of the tropics and place it closer to the North or South Pole. Easy. The altitude doesn't matter as much because the climate is colder anyway, and so now we have snow. The only problem is that if we do that, then the shore and tropic levels start to get a little iffy instead. That rain I mentioned earlier doesn't exist anywhere outside the tropics, and so Peak's mountain cannot have snow and a lush cloud forest at the same time. It just doesn't happen. All is not lost, however, as there are two possible explanations as to how this is happening. And so, yeah, before we can answer the first question, we have to answer the second. Where in the world is this island? The first potential solution is the Humboldt Current. For the uninitiated, the Humboldt Current is a cold ocean current that flows north along the western coast of South America. You've heard me mention South America in this video before, right? Because of the rain in the tropics level, we know that the island is near the equator, and because capybaras are native to South America, we know that the island is somewhere off their coast too. And so, if the Humboldt Current is involved here, then the water temperature around the island is going to be much lower than what you'd normally see in this area of the world. Is that enough to lower the surrounding temperature and create snow on a sub 2,000 meter mountain? Truth is, I don't know. It's entirely unprecedented and I don't know enough about ecology, geology, or whatever other ologies would let me know how much air conditioning a big rock needs to make snowmen. However, I do know that this current alone has changed the climates of Chile, Peru and Ecuador in pretty absurd ways. So while I'm not certain it would do the same here, I'm not so uncertain that I wouldn't include it in this video. The second possible reason, and probably my favourite, is that the volcano itself, the one we climb up in-game, went off spectacularly. Doesn't make a lot of sense out of context, but I can explain. Back in 1815, the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history occurred within Mount Tambora. It was so violent that the ash it spewed out blocked out the sun and lowered global temperatures for an entire year. It was later called the Year Without a Summer, so you can only imagine how devastating this was. Could this be what's happening here? Another year without summer? Why am I talking like this? Well, there isn't a lot of evidence for this since we never see anything beyond the airport and island, but I do have a little bit of circumstantial evidence that might suggest so. First off is the lava we see in the Caldera and kiln. This volcano is clearly active, even supported by the fact that the same random variator that turns the sand in the shore black also sometimes spills lava down as far as the tropics level, so this volcano is still doing stuff, but isn't erupting because it's already erupted. Secondly, if you play the game for long enough, you'll encounter the fog. If you turn around and walk out to sea, it'll cloud your vision. If you go too far to either side of the island while you're climbing it, it'll choke you out there too. And if you stay in one spot for too long, it'll rise so high up that it'll get you anyway. And what happens when it gets you? Well, it attacks you, of course. Now, what kind of fog behaves like that? Normal fog is made out of tiny water droplets and form early in the mornings or late at night. It's cool, damp, smells like nothing, and crowds around at about ground level. This? It's not fog, it's ash. Ash-laced fog looks like fog, but lingers unnaturally, even during the day. Check. It feels heavier and might have a grey or gritty tinge. Check. And finally, if you get stuck in it, God forbid, it'll absolutely demolish you. Check. That's ash, baby! So yeah, Peak's volcano may have erupted recently and covered the area in sun-blocking ash clouds. If it sticks around for long enough, then yeah, it would lower temperatures, paired with the cold currents we're getting from the Humboldt current, because why does it have to be just the one explanation, then snow may very well be able to form at those lower altitudes. Not to mention that if the area really is covered in sun-blocking ash clouds, then that might explain why we crashed too. Aside from being part of Bing Bong Airlines, it probably doesn't help if the pilot can't see outside of their window. And just like that, we answered both questions at once. 1. Could the Peak Island exist as we see it in real life? With a few acts of God helping it along, yes, it could, theoretically. And 2. Where is the Peak Island located? Well, as we mentioned before, the coconuts and jellyfish suggest a tropical base, the mid-elevation rainforest in the tropics suggests that we're near the equator, and the capybaras suggest that we're along the northwestern coast of South America. Not to mention that the fact we're on an active volcano narrows us down even further by placing us along the Nazca Plate, the same one that created various other volcanic islands in the region, like the Gallipoli archipelago. So in summary, the devs definitely did their research when it came to real-life ecological systems when they were designing this game. And they didn't have to do that, but you gotta respect that they went that extra mile. I'm just glad I had something to sink my teeth into this time. But anyway, if you liked the video, like the video and leave a comment if you agree or disagree with anything I said. Join me for the ride if you fancy, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.